All right. Hopefully everyone is doing great. It is Monday, the 16th of December, one day after trade restrictions were lifted on roughly 85 players. 87% of the NBA is now trade eligible. We saw a couple deals over the weekend. Certainly two of them had to correspond with the December 15th restrictions being lifted. I thought we would talk a little bit about those deals. Certainly the Paul Reed waiver, kind of walk through the cap mechanics. We've got the all trade team out on ESPN.com. You can go check that out. We have a first and second team. We'll go through kind of the semantics as far as how we came about with that, and we'll go through some of the players. Certainly we've talked about Jimmy Butler at length before. Wednesday, we have our big article coming out, which is our annual roster breakdown article, which we take a look at all 30 teams. We ask the big questions each front office has to ask. Players that can't be traded, controllable contracts, free agents, long-term salary, the apron restrictions, finances for each team, the draft equity, basically a snapshot for all 30 teams. That is not the master trade guide that will come out at the end of January, but it gives you an in-depth look at each team and certainly some of the questions. I think the apron stuff, which for most I think is somewhat appealing there, just based on when you're trying to go out and make a deal, the limitations as far as where, what teams can do. So that will be out on Wednesday. I think Thursday, I just got an email that we are going to have an article out, Kevin Pelton and Chris Herring, where Kevin, who is our master grader, is going to look at some transactions from the offseason. We're basically going to regrade those and certainly talk a little bit about those. And then Wednesday, I'm going to Orlando for the G League Classic, which is kind of like the winter meetings for the NBA. So 2 minutes in, and we really haven't talked about much, right? So a little bit about the trades here. I think certainly Friday, Thomas Bryant goes from Miami to Indiana, gives the Pacers some front court depth. Ironic, I saw, I'm not sure who tweeted this out. It might have been Steve Jones in the Kiss. They said, well, if you had waited a day later, you would have probably been able to get Paul Reed for cheaper and less expensive, which was a pretty funny take. So they go out and they get some front court depth. Thomas Bryant, 1 year minimum contract. The minimums can be traded without salary matching. Gives the Heat flexibility. They've got 2 roster spots. They've got to sign a player by the 29th of December. They have enough flexibility below the second apron to go out and sign a player. The likelihood is they sign a player and then they wait until after the trade deadline to fill that 15th player. So they've got flexibility. I think they're 3.7 below the second apron. To go out and do that, and that gives him some more flexibility. Thomas Bryant really was not playing minutes. So a little bit about how that trade happened. Certainly the big one, which was Saturday and then became final on Sunday, was the Dennis Schroder trade. Kind of coincides with this trade, All-NBA or All-Trade team. We had Schroder as number 1 on our list of talking to teams, executive scouts, and that's really who the list is based off of talking to. Certainly there's some input from me when I'm writing it, but I'm really taking the input of talking to people around the league, kind of who are the names to keep an eye on. That's not going to mean players are going to be traded off this list, but just to keep an eye on, and there are some interesting names. But I just thought Schroder, and when you talk to teams, he was the ideal candidate. $13 million contract, last year of his deal, fit within any team that had a $12.8 million player like Golden State did with DeAnthony Melton. I thought the timing of Melton's injury, certainly Brooklyn winning a little bit. When you go out and you trade and you reacquire your draft picks like the Nets did from Houston this summer, the goal is not to be the 8th seed or the 9th seed or sneak into the play-in. The goal is really to kind of give yourself a foundation, which I think they did in the first 20 games, and I talked about it after that West Coast trip. Give yourself a foundation, and then basically you're going to bottom out. And when you bottom out and you trade your one of your best players, and certainly your point guard, and there's not much point guard on depth, you're probably going to see a free fall with this Nets team. I don't blame them. I understand it. But it's funny when people always say like teams got to tank, teams got to tank. How you tank or how you become less inferior is basically you remove toys from the toy box that your coach can have on the court. And I think with this Nets team, certainly removing Schroder, we'll see what happens next. There's probably still enough time out there to get a top 7, top 8 pick, which is the end goal when you're looking at Brooklyn with their draft equity, and that's what they did. I saw a lot of people say that they should have held on for a first, or why wasn't Brandon Podziemski? The value of Dennis Schroder around the league was second-round picks. Dennis Schroder was not getting a first-round pick. If you waited it out, probably the asking cost would have probably gone lower, and probably Brooklyn would have won more games. So I think, considering that Brooklyn got 2 seconds from Atlanta and a Golden State second, I thought they did pretty well. I think Golden State, certainly the timing right now was like you needed another depth, you needed another ball handler, you need another shooter. The Melton injury team is 2-8 in their last 10. Schroder gives you some toughness at the cost of 3 second-round picks, and it was much needed. They could not wait until closer to the deadline to do something. This was kind of a proactive move. And I give them credit for going out and do that and recognizing like we need some depth here, and they certainly get it in a starter with Schroder. As I said, 3 seconds, $330,000 below the first apron. They basically have to wait until the end of March to sign a 15th player. Brooklyn's got 13 seconds now. Golden State is now down to 2. They still have most of their draft picks, although they owe a pick to the Wizards in 2030. The interesting thing, and for all the cap people out there who love the CBA, and just because we haven't seen it, is what happened in Detroit with Paul Reed, who was on a non-guaranteed contract at 7.7. The Pistons were the only team with cap space. They waived Paul Reed, and what happened was it dropped them below the minimum salary floor, which you have to spend 90% of the cap by the first day of the regular season. They fell below the floor. 1.4, they were below. They had it to the next day, which was Sunday night, to sign a player. They signed Javonte McCoy to a $1.4 million contract. It kind of, when it happened, and excuse me, Brian Windhorst said it on the podcast, the Hoop Collective, like everybody that I talked to and he talked to, like, okay, what's going to happen? Is there a $14 million player coming into Detroit? And nope. It was basically just a salary cap savings. Reed's cap hit was $2.5 million. They go out and sign Javonte McCoy to a 1-year deal. I think the only thing I would probably critique about it is why don't you just sign him to a 4-year contract? What happens if he comes in and explodes? I don't think that will happen. But there was no harm, no foul signing him to a longer-term deal instead of kind of a 1-year hit. If they waived McCoy, let's say tomorrow, then the clock starts again as far as them reaching the minimum floor. What happened if they would not have reached the minimum floor? If they said, you know what, we don't want to sign a player, they would have lost roughly $19 million in luxury tax distribution. So it was interesting. Detroit's the only team that finds themselves in that situation, but they're sitting at $14 million in room. That is the most of any team out there. So they're, Detroit is in a prime position as that third team to go out and facilitate a deal as far as take back salary. Let's say if Golden State moves some money and wants to go big, game hunting, they have the room to go out and become a facilitator and build back their draft equity, which really is, besides seconds, it's interesting. A team that's consistently in the lottery has no first-round picks from other teams, and they actually owe their first to the Timberwolves, which the Knicks had, and then sent it to Minnesota in the Karl-Anthony Towns trade. So that's a little bit of the semantics as far as the trades that happened over the weekend. And then certainly we have the All-NBA team up there. As I said, Schroder was the unanimous guy that team execs and scouts. And basically how we did it was we just canvassed the league. We said, kind of give me 10 names. Let's rank them. Let's see how it goes. I think the surprise, certainly, and a lot of people are like, where's Jonathan Kuminga? And Kuminga is somebody teams have talked about. But unless Golden State is going to go out and make a blockbuster type move, Kuminga, it's hard for me to see getting moved. I think, certainly how he's played of late, my gut, and this is just my gut, would be that he would be like, you're not just going to move him because you didn't extend him. So the people we have on the first team, certainly Jimmy Butler. We've talked about his situation in the video. And at the end of the day, my feelings are the same as it was last Friday, I think, when I did it. The Heat are in the driver's seat. They basically control what happens to the future of Jimmy Butler. I don't see a team out there, and that's just talking to teams. I don't see a team out there willing to spend $35 million, $40 million on Jimmy Butler in free agency. And that certainly could change. But as of right now, I don't see that. So we have Jimmy Butler on there. We have Zach LaVine. I think there's an interesting quote in there from a team basically saying, and LaVine is having a really good year. Basically, if this was 2017 under the old CBA, LaVine would be a perfect trade candidate because there's no restrictions. But when you're making $44 million, and even though you're having a good year, it kind of boxes you into the corner. And that was kind of the sentiment. But that's somebody that teams certainly talked about to maybe keep an eye on when we get closer to February 6th. So LaVine, certainly Brandon Ingram. What's the future of Brandon Ingram, who's out with an injury? An expiring contract, extension eligible, 4 for $208. I don't see that happening. It would have happened probably in July. So we list basically kind of the different options as far as what will happen with Ingram. Sign an extension for less than the max. New Orleans finds a new team. And then no trade materializes. I think the value of Ingram with his bird rights, when we look at him, which means is the ability to re-sign your own free agent, which Ingram has, if he's traded, has a lot of benefit than trying to acquire a player to win now. I think whoever goes out and tries to acquire Brandon Ingram, it's basically for the long play here. It's not to win you games in March and April, especially a guy that's out with an injury. So when I think with Ingram, listen, I wouldn't be surprised if no trade materializes and New Orleans revisits this. They're not just going to give the guy away because he's on an expiring contract and you haven't worked out an extension. So Ingram is another name to keep an eye on. Zion is fascinating just because of his contract, and we're going to probably write more about that down the road. He's not getting cut. Let's get that out of the way. His next 3 years are non-guaranteed. The 2025-26 year salary becomes guaranteed on July 15th. He's got value because it is a great contract for a team looking to just try to maybe take a swing for the fences, and if they don't have to give up much. From the Pelicans standpoint, the best thing for New Orleans is to do nothing with him, get him on a court, rebuild his value. Maybe that helps you on the court, and maybe it helps, certainly from a trade standpoint here. But for right now, based on his injury history, I think it's 25 cents on the dollar as far as what, and this is just me talking, as far as what you're looking at from a Zion Williamson standpoint, just because of the lack of durability, the injury history. Jonas Valanciunas, he was on our second team, but we moved him up to first team when Schroder was traded. $9.9 million salary, prime candidate to get moved. It's a really good number. He can start for you. He can come off the bench for you. We wrote about why the Wizards kind of went out and acquired him, certainly used as a trade asset because that trade exception they had was set to expire here. So certainly Valanciunas. Some other names to keep an eye on. This is our second team. D'Angelo Russell. Feels like we've seen Russell's name in trade rumors. Colin Sexton in Utah. Jeremy Grant in Portland. Bobby Portis in Milwaukee. And Mitchell Robinson in New York. Mitchell Robinson is an interesting case because how much value does Mitchell Robinson have on the court in New York, and how much does he have on the trade front? Because that is really New York's last big trade asset they have is Mitchell Robinson. But until he can get on the court, it's going to be really hard to basically extract the most. And it's the same with Zion. All right, even if Robinson comes back and he's healthy for 10 games, do teams still trust him enough to make something of significance to give back to New York here? And then we have some honorable mentions. Some guys that weren't mentioned, certainly Cam Johnson. Cam Johnson, the thing with Cam, and when you talk to teams, those bonuses, because when you're an apron team or any team, bonuses count against the apron. He's got $4.5 million in unlikely bonuses that will count besides his $22.5 million number. That's a big number. I mean, $27 million. Remember this, a third of the league are either in the apron or pressed up against the apron. And it is extremely, extremely hard to go out and trade for $20 million plus type guys. We've talked about it at length as far as Jimmy Butler and why it's going to be hard, why it's hard for Zach LaVine, Brandon Ingram, why it's going to be hard for Cam Johnson, why it's going to be hard for Kyle Kuzma, whose contract declines, Jeremy Grant, who's on this list. Like, the hard part for Jeremy Grant, I'm going back to this, is it increases. Kuzma's contract declines. The last year of Jeremy Grant is $36.4 million when he's 33 and is not having a great year right now. So like your window to maximize that Jeremy Grant trade is probably now or was a year ago. And if it doesn't happen, your window is going to start to close on that because that contract is increasing along with his age here. So those are some names to keep an eye on as far as our all NBA or all trade candidate list. You can go on ESPN.com to go take a look at it. As I said, we've got content coming out Wednesday. We've got content coming out Thursday. G League Showcase. We've got eventually down the road, we rank the teams as far as 1 to 30 with draft assets, which is a pretty neat article. I don't know when that comes out, but plenty of content out there. As we've seen over the weekend, trade season has certainly happened. A couple minor deals, and I think it'll be interesting as far as the fit in Schroder and where Golden State goes from there. As I said, also, the one name on there we didn't talk about was Kuminga. And listen, this was not a vote of me. This was kind of an informal poll that we've kind of canvassed the league, and here are the 10 names that you see. So that's it. Hopefully everyone has a great day, and we will talk soon. Jimmy with the heat, I'm on fire. It's NBA, it's